The first thing I heard on my wedding night wasn't music. It was a woman screaming. Not the happy kind of scream that sometimes escapes a bride during a playful argument with her new husband. Not laughter. Not excitement. It was the sound of someone begging another human being to stop hurting her. I was standing barefoot in the hallway of the house I had been told would become my home when the scream came again. "Please, Daniel. Please. The neighbors will hear." Then came a crash. I froze. For less than 3 seconds, I tried to convince myself I had misunderstood what I was hearing. Maybe something had fallen. Maybe someone was drunk. Maybe this was simply an ugly family argument that would end before I became involved. Then I heard my mother-in-law cry out. And I knew. I pushed open the bedroom door. What I saw changed my life before I had even been married for 6 hours. My mother-in-law, Evelyn, was on the floor beside the fireplace, one hand pressed against her mouth. Her husband, Victor, stood over her. The elegant man who had smiled for wedding photographs only hours earlier had become someone I didn't recognize. He grabbed Evelyn by the arm and yanked her upright. "You think you can embarrass me in front of everyone?" She shook her head desperately. I didn't say anything. He raised his hand. I didn't think. I ran. "Stop." Victor turned. For one frozen second, all three of us stared at one another. Then I stepped between them. "Don't touch her." Victor looked at me as though I had committed some unimaginable crime. Behind him, Daniel appeared in the doorway. My new husband. Still wearing the white shirt from our wedding reception. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, and his face was completely expressionless. I expected him to protect me. Instead, he said quietly, "Get out of the way, Emma." I stared at him. "What?" "You heard me." His father stepped closer. "Daniel, handle your wife." Something inside me went cold. I turned toward Evelyn. "Are you hurt?" She tried to answer, but her lips trembled. Daniel grabbed my wrist. "Emma, this is not your business." I pulled away. "She's your mother." His jaw tightened. "And he's my father." So? "So you don't understand how this family works." I looked at him. For the first time that night, I understood that I had married a stranger. Then he struck me. The sound of his palm against my cheek echoed through the room. My head snapped sideways. For a moment, I heard nothing. Not Victor. Not Evelyn. Not the frantic voices behind me. Just a high-pitched ringing in my ears. I slowly turned my face back toward Daniel. He looked almost surprised by what he had done. Then his expression hardened. "Now stay out of it." Something changed inside me. I had spent my entire life believing that being strong meant knowing when to stay calm. My father had taught me that. My mother had taught me compassion. And my grandmother had taught me one sentence I never forgot. Never confuse kindness with surrender. Daniel had just made that mistake. He reached for me again. This time, I caught his hand. I twisted. He shouted. 3 fingers bent backward at once. The crack was unmistakable. Daniel dropped to his knees. His scream filled the room. Nobody moved. I looked down at him. Then at his father. Then at the woman bleeding beside the fireplace. My wedding ring suddenly felt like a piece of metal attached to a dead man's hand. I crouched beside Evelyn. "Can you stand?" She stared at me as if she couldn't understand why I was helping her. I held out my hand. "Come with me." She whispered, "You don't know what you're doing." Neither do they. I helped her to her feet. Behind us, Daniel was still clutching his injured hand. Victor took one step toward me. I looked at him. He stopped. Don't. My voice was quiet. But everyone heard it. I walked Evelyn toward the door. And as I opened it, I heard Daniel say something that would haunt me for months. "You have no idea what you've just done, Emma." I looked back. No. I tightened my grip around Evelyn's trembling hand. "But I know exactly what you did." And then I walked out of my marriage. Before midnight. Before the wedding cake had even been cleared. Before I had slept beside the man who was supposed to be my husband. I thought the worst part was over. I was wrong. Because the beating I had witnessed that night wasn't the beginning of the nightmare. It was the first crack in a secret that had been buried inside the Bennett family for 27 years. And by sunrise, I would discover why Evelyn had never left. Why Daniel had defended his father. Why an entire family had spent decades pretending not to see what was happening behind closed doors. And most terrifying of all, why my husband had been so desperate to marry me in the first place. My name is Emma Hart. And this is the story of how my wedding night ended my marriage. And began the fight that finally freed my mother-in-law. Evelyn could barely walk by the time we reached the driveway. Her breathing was shallow. There was a dark bruise forming beneath her left eye, and her lower lip was split. I opened the passenger door of my car. "Sit down." She hesitated. "Emma. Please." She climbed inside. I shut the door and ran around to the driver's side. My hands were shaking so badly that I missed the ignition button twice. When the engine finally started, I pulled away from the house. Neither of us spoke. The enormous Bennett estate disappeared behind us. I kept looking in the rearview mirror. I expected Daniel to come after us. He didn't. That frightened me more. At the first red light, I looked at Evelyn. "Do you want me to call the police?" Her entire body stiffened. "No. Evelyn, he just beat you." "I know. He could have killed you." "I know. Then why don't you want help?" She stared through the windshield. "Because you don't understand what they will do." "Who?" She closed her eyes. "The family." I almost laughed. "The family? You think Victor is the worst one?" Her words silenced me. I looked at her. "What does that mean?" She didn't answer. The light turned green. I drove. 5 minutes later, my phone began vibrating. Daniel. I ignored it. He called again. Then again. Then a text appeared. "Come back." Another followed. "You don't know what you're doing." Then. "You have no idea what your father signed." I stared at the message. "What did your son mean?" Evelyn's face went pale. "Don't answer him." I wasn't planning to. "Emma." She grabbed my wrist. Her fingers were cold. "Don't go back to that house." "I won't. No matter what they promise you." "I won't. No matter what Daniel says." "I won't." She swallowed. "And especially if they tell you your father is involved." My heart stopped. "What?" Evelyn looked away. "Take me somewhere safe." That was all she said. I drove straight to a private emergency clinic owned by my father's longtime business partner. My father, Michael Hart, was traveling overseas that week, but his assistant answered on the first ring when I called. I told her I needed a doctor. I didn't explain everything. I couldn't. 20 minutes later, Evelyn was being examined. I sat alone in the waiting room. My wedding dress was still hanging in the garment bag in the back seat. I stared at my left hand. The diamond ring Daniel had given me suddenly looked obscene. 6 months earlier, I had believed I had found the safest man in the world. Daniel had been patient, thoughtful, gentle. He had remembered tiny things about me. The tea I liked. The book I had mentioned once. The way I hated thunderstorms. He had held my hand when my grandmother died. He had told me I deserved a peaceful life. And I had believed him. That was the part that hurt most. Not the slap. Not even the broken fingers. The realization that the person I had trusted had apparently been acting for months. My phone vibrated again. This time it was my father. I answered. Dad? His voice changed immediately. Emma? I'm okay. You don't sound okay. I closed my eyes. Dad, something happened. What happened? I hesitated. Then I told him. Everything. The argument. Victor attacking Evelyn. Daniel hitting me. My reaction. My decision to leave. My father's silence afterward was so complete that I checked the screen to make sure the call hadn't disconnected. Finally, he spoke. Where are you? I gave him the clinic's name. I'm coming home. Dad, you don't have to. I'm coming home. His voice was different now. Not angry. Worse. Controlled. Emma, listen to me carefully. I'm listening. Do not return to the Bennett house. I won't. Do not meet Daniel alone. I won't. And whatever they tell you tomorrow, don't sign anything. I frowned. Why would I sign anything? Another silence. Then my father said. Because I think this marriage may have had very little to do with love. I stared at the floor. You think they planned this? I don't know yet. Then find out. I will. The call ended. A nurse appeared at the doorway. Emma? I stood. How is she? She has 2 fractured ribs, a deep laceration above her eyebrow, and significant bruising. The doctor wants to keep her overnight. I nodded. Can I see her? Yes. I entered the room. Evelyn was awake. She looked smaller than she had at the wedding. Almost fragile. I sat beside her. I'm sorry. She looked confused. For what? For bringing you into this. A faint smile appeared. You didn't bring me into anything, sweetheart. She reached for my hand. I gave it to her. Her eyes dropped to the wedding ring. You should take that off. I looked down. I will. No. She shook her head. Take it off now. I slid the ring from my finger. Evelyn watched me place it on the bedside table. Good. Why? Because Daniel will try to convince you that tonight was an accident. I looked at her. It wasn't? She stared at the ceiling. No. My stomach tightened. How long has Victor been hurting you? She didn't answer. Evelyn. 27 years. I stopped breathing. 27. Since Daniel was born? She nodded. He was 3 when it started. Why didn't you leave? She laughed softly. There was no humor in it. Where would I go? Your family. They stopped speaking to me years ago. Friends? Victor made sure I didn't have any. The police? Her eyes filled with tears. I tried once. What happened? He convinced them I had fallen down the stairs. I stared at her. And Daniel? She closed her eyes. Daniel was 7. My voice became softer. What did he do? He stood in the hallway. And? He watched. My chest tightened. He didn't help you? Evelyn shook her head. He was 7. Victor told him that if he called the police, I would go to prison. I felt sick. He believed him? 4 years. She looked at me. That's how Victor controlled this family. Fear. Not just physical fear. Fear of losing everything. Fear of being blamed. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of being poor. Fear of being disbelieved. Fear of one another. I squeezed her hand. Then why did Daniel marry me? Evelyn's expression changed. That question frightened her. Emma. Why? She looked toward the door. Because your family has something Victor desperately wants. What? She hesitated. Then whispered. Your father's company. I didn't sleep. At 6 a.m, my father's plane landed. At 7, he walked into the clinic. My father was 62, tall, silver-haired, and usually calm. That morning, he looked like a man who had spent the entire flight deciding how much destruction he was willing to cause. He hugged me first. Then he saw my cheek. His jaw tightened. I'm sorry. Don't. I should have seen it. You couldn't have. I trusted them. So did I. He looked at Evelyn through the glass panel. Is she awake? Yes. He entered her room. I followed. Evelyn tried to sit up. My father immediately stopped her. Please don't. She looked at him. You must be Emma's father. Michael Hart. I've heard of you. He gave a humorless smile. I wish I'd heard more about you. She lowered her eyes. I wasn't important. My father's expression hardened. Any woman who survives 27 years of abuse is important. Evelyn began crying. My father pulled a chair closer. Tell me everything. She looked at me. I nodded. So she did. For almost an hour, Evelyn told us about the Bennett family. Victor controlled every account. Every property. Every decision. Evelyn had no personal bank account. No credit card. No car. No passport. Her phone plan was in Victor's name. He monitored her calls. He knew where she went. He knew who she spoke to. When she once tried to leave, he threatened to accuse her of stealing from the family. When she considered divorce, he threatened to take Daniel away. When Daniel grew older, Victor trained him to believe that protecting the family meant protecting Victor. And there was one more thing. A secret financial arrangement. 3 years earlier, Victor had learned that Michael Hart planned to retire. Michael's company owned several commercial properties worth hundreds of millions. Victor wanted access. But Michael had refused every partnership proposal. So Victor changed tactics. He encouraged Daniel to pursue Emma. Not casually. Strategically. Evelyn looked at me. They wanted you inside the family. My father leaned forward. For what? To convince your father to merge part of his company with Daniel's investment group. I felt cold. My father stared at her. Daniel doesn't have an investment group. Not a legitimate one. My father stood. He walked to the window. Then he pulled out his phone. Emma. Yes? Do you remember the business proposal Daniel presented to me last spring? Yes. I rejected it. Why? Because the numbers didn't make sense. Evelyn whispered. They weren't supposed to. My father turned around. What do you mean? Victor had already borrowed against everything. Everything. The house. The businesses. The properties. Even Daniel's future inheritance. They were drowning. And they needed access to my father's wealth before anyone realized it. My father looked at me. Your marriage was the collateral. I couldn't speak. Suddenly, every strange moment from the last year came rushing back. Daniel asking how much money I expected to inherit. Daniel asking whether I had signed the family trust. Daniel asking whether my father intended to give me shares in the company. I had thought he was curious about our future. He had been studying my value. My father called his chief financial officer. Freeze every transaction involving the Bennett Group. Then he called his lawyer. Open every file involving Victor Bennett. Then he called someone else. Audit the marriage contract. I stared at him. The marriage contract? My father looked at me. Did you sign one? Yes. Did you read every page? I thought my attorney did. He didn't answer. That silence told me enough. An hour later, our lawyer arrived. She reviewed the agreement. Then she looked at me. Emma, there's a problem. What? Your agreement contains an unusual clause. What clause? If the marriage is dissolved within the first 30 days, certain financial claims are automatically triggered. I frowned. Claims against whom? She looked at my father. Your family trust. My blood ran cold. Daniel hadn't married me for money after all. He had married me for access to my inheritance. And if I left him immediately, they expected the settlement clause to force my family into paying them. My father closed his eyes. Then he said quietly, "They planned for you to leave." I looked at him. What? They knew this family was unstable. He pointed at the contract. They expected you to discover the abuse eventually. I couldn't understand. Then why marry me? Because they wanted the divorce payout. Evelyn suddenly spoke. No. We turned toward her. They wanted more than money. She looked terrified. There was another clause. What clause? I asked. She shook her head. I don't know exactly. Then what do you know? She stared at me. Victor told Daniel that once the marriage was complete, your father would be forced to transfer control of one specific property. My father froze. Which property? Evelyn whispered the address. My father went completely still. I knew that address. It was the Heart Medical Center. The building that had belonged to my grandfather. The building my father had promised would remain in the family forever. Victor didn't want my money. He wanted control of the property. Because beneath it was something worth far more. A planned redevelopment project. And my father's company had refused to sell. Victor needed my marriage to force the deal. Suddenly, everything made sense. The wedding. The pressure. The contract. Daniel's questions. The sudden interest in my inheritance. It had all been one enormous trap. But they had made one mistake. They had assumed I would be too frightened to fight. They didn't know me. And they definitely didn't know my father. At 9 that morning, Daniel called. I almost didn't answer. Then I did. Emma. His voice sounded different. Weak. Careful. I want to apologize. I said nothing. I shouldn't have hit you. No. I was angry. That's not an excuse. I know. I looked at my father. He motioned for me to continue. Daniel breathed heavily. Can we talk? No. Emma, please. You married me for my family's assets. Silence. Then. Who told you that? Answer the question. I didn't. You did. No. You asked about my inheritance before we were even engaged. That doesn't prove anything. You asked about the trust. Silence. You asked about the medical center. Another silence. Then Daniel said, "Emma, there are things you don't understand." "I understand enough. You think my father controls everything." "He does." "No." His voice cracked. "My father controls me." I stared at the phone. "What? You think I wanted to hurt my mother?" "Then why did you?" "Because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" He didn't answer. "Daniel." "Of him." I closed my eyes. For the first time, I heard something in his voice that sounded real. Fear. Not guilt. Not anger. Fear. My father has been controlling me since I was a child. That doesn't excuse what you did. I know. You hit me. I know. You watched him beat your mother. I know. Then why should I care what happens to you? His voice became barely audible. Because I'm trying to get out too. I didn't respond. He whispered, "Please believe me." I looked at Evelyn. She was watching me. She shook her head. Not because Daniel was lying. Because she knew something I didn't. I asked him, "Where are you?" "At the hospital." "Why?" "My hand." "Where's your father?" "I don't know." "Daniel." "What?" "If you want to tell me the truth, tell me everything." There was a long silence. Then he said, "My father killed someone." My entire body went still. "Who?" "I don't know his name." "Daniel." I was 17. His breathing became unsteady. "He owed my father money." "And?" "I saw him dragged into the basement." I couldn't speak. "Daniel, what happened?" "He never came out." I looked at my father. He had gone pale. Daniel continued. "My father told me that if I ever spoke about it, I'd go to prison too." "Why?" "Because he made me help clean the floor." My stomach turned. "Where?" "The old Bennett warehouse." My father immediately stood. "Ask him if there's evidence." I repeated the question. Daniel whispered, "There's a wall." "What wall?" "Behind the boiler room." "What's inside?" "I don't know." "You do." Silence. "Daniel." Finally, he said, "Boxes." "What boxes?" "Financial records." I felt my pulse increase. My father kept everything. Why? Because he doesn't trust anyone. Not even you? Especially not me. I ended the call. My father looked at me. "We're going to that warehouse." The Bennett warehouse sat in an industrial district nearly 40 miles outside the city. It had been abandoned for years. At least officially. The front gate was chained. The building appeared empty. But my father's security team found fresh tire tracks. Someone had been there recently. We entered with police officers. The boiler room smelled like rust and dust. A detective examined the wall Daniel had described. Nothing. Then he noticed a section of brickwork that didn't match. They removed it. Behind the wall was a narrow chamber. Inside were dozens of boxes. Documents. Hard drives. Ledgers. Photographs. And one old video camera. My father stared at the evidence. Daniel wasn't lying. The detective opened the first box. Inside were records going back 20 years. Payments. Bribes. Fake companies. Threats. And photographs of people who had disappeared after owing Victor money. Evelyn had been right. The financial crimes were only the surface. Victor Bennett had built his empire by destroying anyone who stood in his way. But then the detective found something worse. A file labeled Emma Hart, Acquisition Plan. I felt sick. My father opened it. Inside were notes about me. My habits. My friendships. My financial information. My schedule. Even details about my childhood. They had been watching me. 4 months. Maybe years. The first page contained one sentence. Marriage to Emma Hart will provide permanent access to the Hart Family Trust. The second page said, if marriage fails, trigger Clause 14. My father looked at the lawyer. Clause 14. She opened the contract. Her face changed. It requires a payment if Emma initiates divorce within 30 days. How much? She swallowed. $8 million. I almost laughed. $8 million. They had planned to hurt me, push me out, and then collect $8 million for my decision to escape. But there was more. At the bottom of the page was Daniel's signature. I felt something inside me break. Not my heart. That had already happened. My trust. I had wanted to believe Daniel was trapped. Maybe he was. But he had still signed. He had still participated. He had still married me knowing exactly what his family intended. I told my father. I want a divorce. You'll have one. And I want them prosecuted. My father nodded. You have my word. That afternoon, Evelyn gave a statement. For the first time in 27 years, she told the police the truth. Her hands shook. But she spoke. Every assault. Every threat. Every financial crime she had witnessed. Every time Victor forced her to lie. Every time Daniel had been ordered to remain silent. When she finished, the detective closed the folder. Mrs. Bennet, you're not going back to that house. Evelyn looked at me. No. I took her hand. You're coming with me. She smiled through tears. I don't want to be a burden. You aren't. But I'm your mother-in-law. I shook my head. Not anymore. She looked surprised. Then what am I? I smiled. Someone I chose. She cried. And for the first time since I had met her, those tears weren't tears of fear. They were relief. The next morning, Victor was arrested. He had tried to disappear. He didn't get far. The evidence from the warehouse was overwhelming. Daniel was arrested later that day. Not for his father's crimes. For conspiracy and fraud connected to the marriage scheme. When I saw him at the courthouse, he looked nothing like the man who had stood beside me at our wedding. His hand was in a cast. His face was exhausted. He looked at me. Emma. I stopped. I wanted to tell you. You had months. I was scared. So was your mother. His eyes filled with tears. I know. You could have saved her. I know. You could have stopped your father. I know. You chose yourself. He lowered his head. Yes. That was the first honest thing he had ever told me. I walked away. Not because I hated him. Because I finally understood that forgiveness didn't require returning to someone who had hurt you. 3 weeks later, the divorce hearing took place. Victor was already awaiting trial. Daniel had agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. His testimony exposed even more of his father's crimes. The $8 million clause was thrown out. The court determined that the marriage had been entered under fraudulent circumstances. I kept nothing from the marriage except one thing. The ring. Not because I wanted Daniel. Because I wanted to remember who I had been that night. A woman who thought love meant trusting someone completely. I eventually sold the ring. The money went into Evelyn's new account. My father had purchased a small house for her in a quiet town near the coast. No gates. No cameras. No servants. No intimidating mansion. Just a little garden. A porch. And a kitchen where she could cook whatever she wanted. When I visited her for the first time, she was planting roses. She looked happier. Lighter. Almost young. "Do you regret helping me?" she asked. "Never." "You lost your marriage." I smiled. "I lost a man who was willing to hit me." She looked at me. "And what did you gain?" I looked around her little garden. "You." She hugged me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. 6 months later, Victor Bennett was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison for fraud, extortion, witness intimidation, and financial crimes. The murder investigation connected to the warehouse remained open. Several former employees came forward after seeing the evidence. Daniel received a reduced sentence after cooperating with investigators. He wrote me one final letter. I never answered. It said, "Emma, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to remember me kindly. But I need you to know that the night you broke my fingers was the first time anyone had ever made me understand what fear felt like. For years, I thought fear meant obeying my father. You taught me that fear could also mean realizing what I had become. I should have protected my mother. I should have protected you. I didn't. I hope one day I become someone who would. You deserved better. Daniel." I folded the letter. Then I put it in a drawer. Not because I wanted to keep it. Because some chapters don't need to be destroyed. They just need to stay closed. 1 year after my wedding night, I returned to Evelyn's house. She had transformed the garden. There were roses everywhere. She had planted one for every year she had survived. 27 roses. I counted them. "Why 27? She smiled. "Because I want to remember that I survived every one." I hugged her. Then she handed me a small envelope. "What is this?" "Open it." Inside was a photograph. It was from my wedding. I was standing beside Daniel. Smiling. Completely unaware of what the night would bring. On the back, Evelyn had written, "That woman saved me." I turned it over. She said, "I think you're wrong." "About what?" "You didn't save me." I smiled. "Then who did?" "You saved yourself." I didn't understand. She touched my hand. "That night, you could have stayed quiet." "Yes." "You could have gone back to your bedroom." "Yes." "You could have pretended you didn't see anything." "Yes." "But you didn't." She smiled. "You stood between me and the man who had frightened me for 27 years. Her eyes filled with tears. "And when your husband hit you, you didn't become smaller." She squeezed my fingers. "You became yourself." I looked at the photograph again. For the first time, I didn't feel sadness. I felt gratitude. Not for what happened. I would never be grateful for violence. I was grateful that the truth had finally become impossible to ignore. The wedding had been supposed to be the beginning of my life with Daniel. Instead, it became the beginning of my life without fear. I never remarried. Not because I stopped believing in love. Because I learned something more important. Love isn't someone telling you that you're safe. Love is someone proving it when you're vulnerable. Love doesn't ask you to stay silent. Love doesn't make you afraid. Love doesn't require you to surrender your dignity. And family isn't defined by blood. Sometimes family is the woman you were supposed to call your mother-in-law. The woman who had nothing left to give. Yet still worried whether you had eaten breakfast. Evelyn and I remained close for the rest of her life. She eventually became the grandmother my children would one day know. And whenever someone asked how we met, she would laugh and say, "On the worst night of our lives." Then she would look at me. And somehow, it became the best thing that ever happened to both of us. I would always smile. Because I knew the truth. That night didn't make me powerful. The broken fingers didn't make me strong. Revenge didn't make me victorious. The moment that changed everything was much simpler. I saw someone being hurt. And I refused to look away. That was the decision that ended my marriage. The decision that exposed a criminal empire. The decision that gave a terrified woman her freedom. And the decision that finally taught me who I was. My wedding night was supposed to give me a husband. Instead, it gave me a mother. And when my husband raised his hand against me, I didn't lose my future. I found it.